Hello, I'm Paul Ricci. I'm here interviewing Dr. Jim Dougherty, who is the leader of the Northern Appalachian Study Center. Is that it? Did I say it right?
Well, it's called the Center for Northern Appalachian Studies.
Okay.
And it originally was located at Indiana University of Pennsylvania
Mm-hmm.
until I retired in 2013, and I brought it with me home.
Okay.
And I have a sign on my door.
Yeah, I saw it. I'll take a picture of it.
I anointed myself. I didn't
Okay.
have to have a dean or the
Mm-hmm.
president say that I am the center.
Yeah.
I blessed it when I put it
Okay.
on the door, my sign,
So,
proclaiming that it's the Center for Northern Appalachian Studies.
okay. Well, that's good.
And out of that came the Northern Appalachian Folk Festival.
Mm-hmm.
That was a spinoff.
Yeah.
And it was started in 2013, and now we're on our 10th year.
So yeah, it's still going strong.
It's still going, yeah, hanging in there.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes, I am a member of the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, there's two Northern Appalachia Writers Associations.
Mm-hmm.
The Writers Conference of Northern Appalachia and the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia. I guess they're both.
I'm sure there's some competition, or
Yeah.
hopefully that having more is better than less.
Yes, more ideas to exchange. So
More, although hopefully those two groups will
Mhm.
find a way to get along.
Yeah, I guess
in today's world.
Yes, I do know Damian Dressick. He's a professor, I think, at Slippery Rock.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess he's the leader of the Writers Association. So, and they have their own conference.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. Should I start back to the beginning?
Yeah. Well, we'll start
you'd be
with
able
there.
to edit, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And should I mention again about
Your
I came from?
Your hometown, sure.
Okay. Yeah. Although I'm currently living right now in Indiana, Pennsylvania, I grew up in two little towns in Clearfield County, one called Woodland and the other called Bigler.
Mm-hmm.
And they were former brickyard towns and coal company towns. The Bigler coal tipple is still operating.
Are those two towns nearby?
Yeah, they're only a mile apart.
Are they far from Du Bois?
And they're 11 miles outside of Clearfield.
Clearfield. Okay.
They're right between Clearfield and Phillipsburg.
Okay.
And if you go on Route 322 heading out of Clearfield to Phillipsburg, there is one traffic light. And that's where Bigler is located.
Okay.
The only traffic light between Phillipsburg and Clearfield, just one. So anyway, I grew up there. My father was a brickyard worker, and in many ways, it was a wonderful place to grow up as a kid, because I had the woods to run in. Now the strip mines were a big problem because they raped the land.
Yeah.
And cut down all the trees, and nothing could grow, on top of it. It was just like shale, mounds of shale. But they did create ponds with high walls on them. And you could jump off the high wall and dive deep into these ponds. Of course, the parents would never approve of doing such a thing. They thought that we were going to kill ourselves.
Yeah, well, I guess luckily the water was deep enough.
Oh yeah, it was deep enough. I'll tell you. But anyway, it was an excellent place for playing around as a kid, exploring, and out of all that experience, I became a born again environmentalist
Mm-hmm.
because I grew up seeing orange creeks,
Yeah.
water wells that would be drilled and turn out to produce orange water,
Mm-hmm.
bony piles that would catch on fire through spontaneous combustion in the middle of July and burn and give off this obnoxious rotten egg smell throughout this
Mm-hmm.
valley.
Wow.
And I looked at the little creek that ran through my town, and it was orange with all kinds of garbage and debris in it.
Okay. All right, just checking.
All kinds of garbage and debris in it. And I looked at that and I thought, as a kid, I wonder what it was like whenever you could fish in it. You couldn't fish in it then, and you still can't.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Well, yeah, I guess they've done some reclamation to try to make a little bit around Johnstown. They did.
It's shameful. It's shameful what they've done to the earth, what they did to Mother Earth.
Mm-hmm.
When I was teaching at IUP, many of the students thought that I was from Berkeley, California,
Yeah.
and that I was a tree hugger.
Mm-hmm.
They got the tree hugger part right,
Yeah.
but they got the Berkeley part wrong
Mm-hmm.
because I got my bachelor's degree from Clarion State College
Yeah.
with a liberal arts degree.
Mm-hmm.
And the professors would always say to me, "Hey, Dougherty, what are you doing majoring in liberal arts? You're never going to get a job with that.
Yeah.
You know, this is not Berkeley, California. This is Clarion State College." And so I graduated.
Yeah.
And I immediately sent out 70 resumes, and I got 0 responses.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in trouble. And I said, well, I guess my Clarion State College professors were correct. They were correct in the short run.
Mm-hmm.
In the long run, they were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because that bachelor's degree in liberal arts led to me becoming a Vista volunteer for 2 years. And then I worked on the Johnstown flood in 1977
Okay.
in a disaster center. And then after that, that enabled me to get in a master's program in sociology here at IUP. And out of that, I was able to parlay my master's degree into a PhD program at the University of Buffalo.
Okay.
And so I got my PhD in American Studies at the University of Buffalo.
Okay.
So I got a bachelor's degree in liberal arts from Clarion, a master's degree in sociology from IUP, and a PhD in American Studies at the University of Buffalo.
And then you came. Did you come straight to IUP after that?
Well, when I was working on my master's degree at IUP, I started teaching because I had enough credits. I could do that back then.
Yeah.
And so I first started teaching a class in 1979.
Yeah.
I taught for 30 years at IUP. So I first started in 1979, and lo and behold, the first class was with state police officers in Meadville, PA. And it wasn't the rank and file police officers, it was the captains and lieutenants and the sergeants. And so here I am, a 29-year-old hippie
Mm-hmm.
Standing in my first class I'm teaching, I had no idea what I was doing, and the class was filled up with 35 police officers, state police officers, and that's how I got started.
Wow.
That's how I
Okay.
got started, and then it just one thing led to another. The next thing I know, I'm teaching prisoners in a maximum or minimum security prison in Mercer, PA.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was at the University of Buffalo as part of my graduate assistantship, I taught in a maximum security prison in Buffalo for one academic year. And those were incredible experiences.
Yeah.
And I remember people would always say to me when I tell that story was that, Jim, I bet you really taught those prisoners something, didn't you? And I said, I didn't teach them anything.
They taught you.
They taught me.
Yeah.
They taught me about being black in America. They taught me about racism. They taught
Mm-hmm.
me about the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
Taught me about young black 15 or 16-year-olds that did something wrong and stupid and
Mm-hmm.
then ending up in prison for life or 20 years.
Yeah.
But they were geniuses. They were all like Malcolm X,
Mm-hmm.
very intelligent and well read. But I looked at them and I compared them to the IEP professors, and the IEP professors had nothing on those prisoners.
Yeah.
They were much more articulate and much more well read than
Mm-hmm.
the IEP professors. They could have been professors themselves. And so, what did I learn out of that? I learned that no one wins. Uh, there's always a victim in a crime, but even the perpetrator of the crime is a victim as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the case of these prisoners in Buffalo, they were all studying for their master's degrees,
Yeah.
and they didn't fool around. And they were serious students. One was even working on his PhD in English,
Yeah.
and you know the although we had the victims of the crime, but the prisoners' lives, they could have really contributed something to society,
Mm-hmm.
but they couldn't because they're prisoners,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
so
I guess
so
if
everyone loses out.
so, even if they could get out of prison, it'd be hard to find a job in academia.
They're black and have a prison record
Yes. Yes.
that will never go away.
Yeah. Well, yes, that is one of the tragedies
Yep,
and one of the
yep,
big losses.
yep. Yeah, I had some brilliant students. It was unbelievable. Yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
was the best teaching experience I ever had in my life. Yeah, so I ended up at IUP and became their utility baseball player, utility professor in the IUP sociology department. I did teach in the history department for a little bit. And in the history department, I organized three what we called oral history, visual ethnography field schools, where we went into a community and conducted oral interviews of local residents.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had three of them. I had a small grant from the National Park Service, and we set it up where students would have to attend classes and learn about how to do interviews and how to package them and the theory and methodology of ethnography and oral history techniques for 1 week. And then after that, we would spend 2 weeks in the field. The first town we went to was Patton, and I had 28 students, and they conducted over 100 interviews, and they did it right. They had all the biographical information. They indexed the tapes. They were audio cassette tapes, and they got the release forms signed, and they had logs of photography that they took, all that documentation, and that's now in the IUP archive. The second Oral History Institute was at Nantiglow. We did the same thing there. I only had about 15 students for that project, but they did a heck of a job. And one outcome of the Nantiglow Oral History Institute was that it spun off to the local community the idea that Nantiglow should have a historical society. And so the local people, local people created the Nantiglow Historical Society based upon the work that my students did in that Oral History Institute.
I think they're working on creating their own museum. And
right.
Yes, I met some of them at the Laurel Highlands Heritage Festival.
So. And then the third one was in Portage. And we did the same there. We had about a dozen students, and they conducted the interviews and compiled and organized them, and they were put in the IUP archive. And then after that, my grant money ran out, and so I approached the IUP administration, and I said, we have a good track record here. We had these 3 oral history institutes. This is good PR for the university. It connects to the local community. It will help in recruiting kids from the area to be IUP students. And I said, is there any way that IUP can help me keep this thing going? What I was asking them was for money. And they said no.
So you have to go begging for more grant money.
And I thought, well, I guess that's reality. What's more important? Here we have something that's really authentic. It's rigorous. It's based on research and theory and methodology and community relations, the whole 9 yards. And it wasn't good enough. I had handed something to them on a silver platter. They saw no value in it.
Oh, that's too bad.
I guess that's why they're administrators and I am not.
I guess sometimes it's better to work outside, do this kind of work outside the university system.
Yep, I think you're right on that. So that's a little bit of my background.
Okay, so yes, I did look at the documentary you did on the demise of the steel industry in the area. I confess, I'm sorry I wasn't able to see the one about the coal industry. I will look that one up and be happy to repost that and put that in the post about your interview.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. I think I have over the last I looked on YouTube, I have something like 2,500 or so views of my mine worker documentary. That's titled "The Struggle for an American Way of Life: Coal Miners and Operators in Central Pennsylvania, 1919 to 1933."
Okay.
And that is a story about my family, broadly defined. And I think many people, when they do a dissertation, they pick something that relates to their own biography, their own family, and that's what I did.
You mean as a dedication?
Well, as a dedication, but also to figure out what happened, because there's nothing written.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
True.
There's nothing.
So
I have a story about that.
Yeah.
when I was a graduate student, I'm working on my PhD at Buffalo. I was reading a book called Workers' Control in America by David Montgomery, the famous historian from Yale University. And I was reading it, and then I came across this footnote, and it was about nationalization of the coal industry. And so in the back, I went through and found a footnote, and here was this plan to nationalize coal in the United States in the 1920s. And that's mine.
Oh, that's yours.
I'm gonna ignore it. But anyway, oh yeah, there's Nick.
Nick, another Nick.
No, that's Nick Brasini.
Okay. Yeah. Nick Brasini. Okay. Well, sorry.
Okay.
I hate to interrupt. Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, I looked at workers' control. I go back into the footnotes, and I find the citation. It said, "How to Run Coal" by John Brophy. John Brophy was the president of District 2 of the United Mine Workers of Central Pennsylvania.
Yeah, there was an IUP researcher who spoke about him that I guess we had that commemoration of the coal miners' strike in Windber.
Right. So anyway, John Brophy was the author of this How to Run Coal plan. And then it said Clearfield, Pennsylvania. And I nearly fell off my chair. I said, now wait a minute. Here's a renowned historian from Yale University citing this in his book, which was a bestseller on worker control in America. He's citing this as a major plan for coal after the First World War.
Yeah.
And it came from Clearfield County. And I said to myself, first of all, I didn't even know that District 2 had an office in Clearfield County. That's where it was originally located. That's the first thing. Secondly, I didn't even hear anything about this plan to run coal, to nationalize the U.S. coal industry, which in those days, in 1919, that was the energy source for the entire country. Everything was based on coal. That's how we heated our houses. That's how we made the steamships go.
And
That's
cook our food.
The railroads were steam locomotives. Everything. The First World War was won because of our coal industry.
Yeah.
And so they had this plan how to nationalize, how to run coal in the United States, and it came out of Clearfield, Pennsylvania, my home area. And when I went to the Clearfield public school system, no one told us a thing about it. Nothing. Nothing.
Yeah, you're surprised you never heard of it. So
nothing. And did that make me feel happy?
No.
And proud? No. I became very angry. And that was intentional. They didn't want working class kids to know about that. Because if they did know about that, they might get some ideas. They might get some ideas. They might start to be a little more critical of the society that they're living in. We don't want to have that.
No. People thinking independently, yes.
We don't want to. We need to just keep them dumb and have a amnesia, a historical amnesia that is intentional, I would say.
All right, let me just double check, make sure it's working. Yep. Okay, we're still going.
Yeah, so that was one case that kind of jumped out at me reading about that plan to run coal written by John Brophy and the United Mine Workers. And to
Mhm.
this day,
Yeah.
that is one of the most important documents that was ever produced by the United Mine Workers of America.
Wow. Okay.
And that was a big fight in the 1920s. It divided the Union.
Mhm.
And Brophy was kicked out of the Union
By John L. Lewis.
by John L. Lewis.
Yes.
And Lewis called
Mm.
Brophy a communist,
Mm.
and they expelled him from the Union. But in the 1930s, when they were attempting to not only reorganize the United Mine Workers, but they developed a CIO. The mine workers created the CIO.
Mhm.
And then they started
CIO stands for.
the Congress of Industrial Organizations,
Okay.
and they it was based on unskilled work. Not the old AFL was focused on skilled workers.
Mhm.
The CIO was industrial unskilled workers that worked in the steel mills,
Mhm.
the automobile factories, in the textile industry, the rubber industry, and other places. So in the 1930s, when they created the CIO, they needed to have organizers. And
Mhm.
what did they do? They turned to the mine workers, the organizers from the mine workers. In particular, one that they wanted back was John Brophy.
Oh.
They brought him back,
Okay.
and he was very instrumental in helping the CIO. So the mine workers created the steel workers, and it was just one thing after another. It was steel industry, auto industry, textile industry, rubber industry. It was like a domino effect. And then by the end of the 1930s, it was hard fought. The bosses weren't going to give anything to the workers. The workers had to literally,
Mhm.
sometimes physically, fight to get recognized by the court system and by the companies. And they eventually did. And then after the Second World War, they grew to their highest level of membership in the 20th century. I think it was in 1953,
Yeah.
something like uh, 32 or so percent of the labor force was in a union.
Mm. No,
Then
now it's about a half that.
it's not
Yeah.
even that.
Yeah.
When we exited the 20th century, we had about 9%.
Mm.
That's an interesting story. When we entered the 20th century, we had about 9% of the workforce unionized. The high
Mm.
point was in the early 1950s with about 32%. Then we exit the 20th century at 9%.
Mm.
And so that's about where we are now.
Wow. Okay. Yes, I know. It's.
And then if you listen to the Republicans, the mega hat wearers, you would think that the union movement was as powerful as any major multinational corporation in the world. But that's a joke.
Mm-hmm.
That's a joke. They know that.
Yeah.
They should be ashamed of themselves saying things like that.
Yeah, but they're not.
No, they're not. They're shameless. They
Mm-hmm.
have no shame.
Yeah. I did have some questions, like watching your documentary on the steel industry. Like you talked about the Homestead strike.
Mm-hmm.
I always wonder, like, do you believe that, say, the barons like Carnegie and Frick,
Mm.
they may have been emboldened by the fact that they got away with, the 1889 flood? They were never held to account for that.
Yep.
Do you think that might have emboldened them to be more aggressive in crushing the strike 3 years later in Homestead?
Well, that's a good question to ask. Now, it's interesting. You know, why were they living in South Fork at the South
Yeah.
Fork
Damn.
Sportsman's Club?
Yeah.
You know, why were they living there? Why did they even create that place? It was because Pittsburgh was such a dirty, smoky, stinking, hot town to live in the summer. They didn't want to live there. They
Yeah.
came out here in the mountains and built that little recreation area and that pond with that shaky dam. And they didn't upkeep the dam. They didn't want to pay to have anyone fix it for them. They didn't care about such things. And then that big storm, rainstorm came in, and the dam couldn't hold all the water, and it broke, and then it wiped out Johnstown, and that was the 1889 flood. But I think that was the attitude
Sure.
that the moguls, the so-called moguls, the rich of Pittsburgh, uh, thought about the workers. Let them live in shit. We're not living in shit. We're going to move out in the summer and into some resort and be in the clean environment and everything. Let the workers in that shit. We're not living in there. We'll come back maybe in the wintertime because we have to do business in our corporate uh, headquarters. But I think that attitude did carry over into the 1892 Homestead lockout, and what it did is that it revealed who Andrew Carnegie was, and also who Henry Clay Frick was, and that they were greedy people that had no concern about anything except to make money and have power. Money and power were the two major concerns for them. They didn't care about how the workers lived, the quality of their living. They didn't care about infant mortality rates. They didn't care about uh, workplace safety. One hunky Dago loses his arm in the mill. No problem. We'll get another one in there. You
Yeah.
know, it's the same thing with the coal mines. The saying with the coal mine is the mule was more important than the miner,
Yeah.
because if the mule got killed, that was a problem for the company because they had to go out and buy another mule. With a miner that was killed or injured, no
Easy to
problem. You just
replace.
go out and get another one for free. And that was the mentality of these coal barons and the steel barons and the upper class of that time. They called it the Gilded Age, and that was their perspective, and they thought that they were entitled. They had a sense of entitlement. They were entitled to it,
Yeah.
to live that way and think that way.
Well, Carnegie,
And,
he did pretend, to be a philanthropist later in life, but
yeah.
that was more of a
Well,
cynical ploy.
there's a great story about that. Of course, after during the 1892 strike, Carnegie tried to wash his hands of it, but he knew what was going to happen, and so he sailed off to Scotland. He had a castle over in Scotland, and so he went there, and then he let Frick do the strong arm, dirty work, and that was to beat the hell out of the steel workers, which he ended up doing. They brought in the National Guard. They had the National Guard occupy Homestead for 6 months, and they brought all the
The
steel
Pinkertons.
workers to trial. They were arrested. And
Call from +12,022,970,198.
sorry, let me see if I'm not going to take that.
Okay.
So yeah, he went to Scotland. And the outcome, of course, was the workers in Homestead and in the steel industry in Pittsburgh were ununionized from that point of time until the 1930s, when the union was recognized in 1937. So that all that time from 1892 to 1937, it was non-union in the U.S. steel industry, except for the skilled workers. They were organized. But anyway, in 1919, Carnegie wrote a letter to Frick, and this is like right 1919. Of course, that was
pretty soon before
that was a big year for strikes. There was a steel worker strike, a mine worker strike, a general strike in Seattle. Even the Boston police went out on strike, and the Soviet Union was taken over by the communists. They had the the communist revolution in Russia, and so they took over Russia, and so there was a specter that this might happen in the United States. And so how did we react? We had the Red Scare.
And the Palmer raids.
The Palmer raids and all that. Yeah, they just, beat, they gathered people up and put them on boats and kicked them out of the United States. But anyway, in 1919, Carnegie wrote a letter to Frick and said, hey, Henry Clay, I'd like to get back and see if we can patch up our differences. I'd like to, meet with you and have a talk, and we could try to straighten things out here a little bit. And Frick wrote back to him and said, I will meet you in hell. And there's a book titled that.
Yeah.
I will meet you in hell. And they have the letter that Frick wrote.
Yeah. So.
And he knew where he was going because of what he did and what Carnegie did. Carnegie tried to buy his way out of hell, and it didn't work.
Yeah. Nope. Well, I don't know. Somehow, maybe things like the Homestead strike, and even at the Appalachian Studies Association, I asked people if they'd heard about the Johnstown flood, and most people said no. It's been largely forgotten outside of the area, and we're both clearing our throats. So yeah, it's funny. I was thinking it would be good maybe if I go next year to the Studies Association, maybe do a presentation on it. Try to remind people.
Well, we were talking about Nick Brazzini.
Yeah.
He was in a play that focused on what would have happened if Carnegie was brought to trial for the Johnstown flood.
Yeah.
And Nick played a part of this is a true character in history, a lawyer from Johnstown who lost his wife and his 2 children in the flood. And he was totally distraught and out of his mind. And he would just aimlessly walk around town and he would yell out, Andrew Carnegie, I am going to get you. And Nick loved that part of the play.
Yeah. Well, sadly they didn't get him.
They didn't get him. But I think Satan did, so.
I guess that's one of the appealing things about religion.
Right.
Everybody gets what they deserve in the next life.
Right. Yep.
So, Yeah, I know I guess like even moving ahead almost 50 years, the 36 flood
Yep.
that preceded the 36 steel strike that finally led to the workers being unionized.
Right. 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 Yeah.
So I just can't help but wonder sometimes if those things are how related those things are.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing leads to another, no doubt. There's all these connections.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm working right now on a historical marker for a Native American grist mill stone that's
Yeah.
located on the IUP campus. That's
Oh.
been overlooked for years, and I want to get a historical marker put in to document it and describe, what it
Mm-hmm.
is and how it got there. But anyway, uh, you talk about the 1936 flood and so forth. Um, in response to that, they built dams. The Army Corps
Mm-hmm.
of Engineers did.
Yeah.
One of the biggest one was up in Warren County, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
It was called the Kinzig Dam, and
Yeah, I guess there were Native Americans
yeah,
were
right.
pushed off
And
their
this
land.
yeah reservation. It wasn't even a reservation in the sense that we know reservations today. It was actually a land grant given to the Seneca people
Mm-hmm.
by none other than George Washington.
Wow.
George
Okay.
Washington signed a deal,
Mm-hmm.
and he promised that the Senecas will have this land forever.
Mm.
Forever.
Yeah.
Forever. That's what he said. And that's what's in the agreement. And then it came along with that 1936 flood, and that like wiped out not only Johnstown, but downtown Pittsburgh and
Mm-hmm.
places all around here. And so the Army Corps of Engineers came up with a plan to have flood control. And so that's why they built that big dam,
Mm-hmm.
the Kinzig Dam in Warren County, which wiped out 10,000 acres of the Seneca land.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to relocate their cemetery. Um, and then as far as this millstone that I'm trying to get recognized on the IEP campus, it was relocated on onto the campus in the 1940s because they were building a flood controlled dam in northern Indiana County near a small town called Smicksburg,
Yeah.
and it was a flood controlled dam on the Mahoning River,
Mm-hmm.
and it flooded that little town. And this Indian gristmill stone was there, and at least they had the wherewithal to save it. And so they brought it in to Indiana, and now it's located on the IUP campus
Where at?
in the Oak Grove. It's in the Oak Grove,
Okay.
right by Oakland Avenue.
I probably walked past it a
Oh yeah, yeah.
million
There's
times.
yeah. No one knows what it is, and they don't know anything about it. But there's a big history, and as far as a Native American is concerned, it has a lot of meaning
Mm-hmm.
because they ground corn in that
Yeah.
millstone. And
Wow.
corn is like the foundation of their worldview. But anyway, yeah, going back to it, one thing does lead to another. And with the
Mm-hmm.
steel workers, of course, they did very well,
Mm-hmm.
comparatively speaking, compared to where we are now. But in the 1950s and the 1960s, they had decent wages and benefits. The steel workers were able to, uh, most of them, move out of those Mon Valley communities, the
Mm-hmm.
steel mill communities, and live in the suburbs and own a house, have a family, uh, have their kids go to college. and they were doing fairly well compared to
Yeah.
what existed in the 1890s, 1892. They were doing pretty good.
Yeah.
And then, lo and behold, what came along was the managers of the steel industry had little incentive to reinvest into steel. What they did was during the World War II, they did upgrade everything with the latest technology for steel making to meet the needs of the Second World War. And so they did. They expanded, and during the war, they would have 3 shifts of workers. Those steel mills went 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In fact, whenever Khrushchev, the premier of the Soviet Union, visited the United States in 1959, he requested that he would want to see 2 things. One was the steel industry. The second was Disneyland.
Yeah. Did they let him see the steel industry?
He went to Homestead.
I know he did. I know he didn't get to go to Disneyland.
He did go. He went to Homestead.
Yeah.
And there's a classic picture of him sitting on the back of a convertible, riding down what's 8th Street, which is the main street of Homestead. And there are crowds of people on both sides of the street waving and cheering Khrushchev. And then he went to this plant called Mesta Machine. Mesta Machine was located in West Homestead, and it was the factory, the plant that made the machinery for the steel industry. All the machines, and these were huge machines. That's where they created the machinery for the steel industry. And so
down a little bit. All right, let's see. Well, we'll reiterate what we were talking about before.
And so we talk about amnesia. And a person wakes up and has amnesia. That person doesn't know who they are, and can't operate.
Or,
what do? I don't know my name. I don't know my history. I don't know anything. And in a sense, that's what we have today as a population. We have historical amnesia.
Yeah.
And it's a amnesia by design. And we can see it today, how important history is. Look at Florida.
Yeah.
They're getting rid of books. They don't want to teach anything
Yeah.
about Black history. They don't want that.
That's true.
That's biased. But if we want to have a book that praises Andrew Carnegie, now you're talking about the correct history now. And if it wasn't for Andrew Carnegie, the workers would really be in bad shape. Now, did Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick give money to the workers out of the kindness of their heart? And the answer to that question was no. The only way that workers got anything in this country is through demanding it. That's the only way they got it. The bankers are not going to give it to you out of look at those cute little mine workers out there. They're kind of like little moles in the ground, digging a hole in the ground. Oh, I think I'll help them out a little bit. It doesn't work that way. The only way they're going to give you anything is that you demand it. And that's what the workers had to do. And that's what we need to continue to do today. The struggle is not over.
Yeah.
The struggle continues.
Yes, I know. It's still even just a struggle. Just even mention the past. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Right.
It's
you
good.
mentioned about Orwell, He who controls the past controls the present. And who controls the present controls the future.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, yes, I kind of do have to get going, but
Okay.
I certainly do appreciate your time, and I'll be happy to interview you in the future.
Sounds like a plan.
So I guess you'll be at the Northern Appalachian Music Festival.
Yeah, well, I'll be there by phone.
Yeah,
I can't get out. I can't drive anymore.
can't go to that. Can't leave the house.
Yeah, I'm pretty homebound here.
Sorry. Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, I do appreciate it, and I will keep you posted, and well, I'll be happy to share stuff with you if there's anything you'd like to
Sure.
contribute to my website.
Sure.
Our website, well, certainly you're certainly welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay.